So, you're a Pats fan. Not the season you wanted now, was it? But not to worry. This Friday, the 4th of November, St. Pat's historian Dermot Looney launches his book Saints Rising to help you through the winter to reminisce on better years. And we have Dermot on the show as well. Welcome onto the show, Dermot.
Thanks indeed, Roy. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you on. Listen, tell us a little about the book, I suppose. How did you start it? Why did you start it?
Yeah, look, there's never been a history book about St. Pat's, right? So, Shelbourne, Shamrock Rovers, Bohemians, plenty of other clubs around the league have had countless books written about them, and some very good ones indeed about, following the club, but also about the history of the club. And just remarkably, St. Pat's have never had one. There's been some nice kind of archives kept and statistics, and some people have tried to get a book off the ground in the past, but Pats have never had a book written about them at all. So about 4 years ago, I said, look, we got to start something on this. So I started researching the history of the club. I write in a program every 2 weeks about the history. And I decided earlier this year, I was still trying to get a book going. I said, we have to cut it off because there's just too many stories to tell from the early years of the club. So I've cut it off at 1961, which is the end of Pat's kind of golden era, golden decade when they entered the League of Ireland. So this is the early history of St. Patrick's Athletic. But I think there's plenty in it for football fans. Obviously, for Pats fans, there's plenty in it. There's a lot of excitement around the club because a lot of this has come from the fans of the club. They've funded the book. They've given me the archives, the photographs. They've given me so much help in getting it. So there's a lot of excitement around Pats about this. But I think there are, great stories in this for League of Ireland fans and just for football fans in general about a team of kids, of young lads from a very ordinary working class background who started a club, which kind of within nearly just over 20 years went on to become champions of Ireland. I think that's a great story.
Who gave you the title St. Pat's historian?
Not me. So I don't know.
That must have been Nathan, was it?
Yeah,
he just branded you.
I was on another. I wasn't a podcast. I was on a kind of another Zoom interview kind of thing that went out, and I said, "Look, I'm not a historian because I'm not qualified. I don't have an academic background in history. Really, I'm very interested in history." And I said, "Look, I'm very much an amateur historian." And then they put that as the title going across the screen in big massive letters, "Amateur historian." So I didn't like that, even though I said it myself. So no, look, I'm just someone with an interest in football history and social history. Inchicore, my dad's from Inchicore, Mam's from Ballyfermot, I'm from a place called Greenhill. So I'm very interested in the local history of the area, where people came from. And look, that feeds in incredibly to the story of football because football is the people's game. Very much so in Inchicore, an ordinary working class community that this team sprang out of the railway works in Inchicore and, played great football and just climbed their way up the different divisions without ever having much money and without ever being that fashionable. Even as the League of Ireland goes, which isn't a fashionable thing at all. But other clubs like Drumcondra, who were a massive club, say in the 50s, Shamrock Rovers, these were fashionable, big clubs with lots of sponsorship and money men behind them. Pat's never had that. So I think it's a really interesting social history as well. Yeah,
it's great. And like you said, it's crazy to think that it's a force of its kind, isn't it? You'd imagine a club as historic as Pat's and everything that the rise and falls that they went through, it would have been put down at paper at some stage. Like even I remember you done wasn't it the history walk throughout the summer, wasn't it, going through the famous park and Blizzard and things like that. So even to see that is fascinating. But I suppose the question I want to get at is the importance of having the history of a club, whether it be the early history. I don't know if you're going to go in. Are you looking to have these books in, maybe win out a second one down the line in terms of going into the 80s and the 90s? I'm not too sure. But what's the importance of having these just these memories and the history of clubs putting down into papers to be passed down maybe from generation to generation of younger Pats fans as it come through?
Yeah, it's so important for any football fan to know a history of their own club, to have a broad sense of it. So where do we go nowadays? We all go to Wikipedia. We just Google, if you're a kid and you want to find out about the history of your club. Unfortunately, one of the problems is Wikipedia is great, but it's frequently wrong. And so, for example, about Pats, the first line is something like St. Pat's moved into Richmond Park in 1930. That's not true. They didn't. They moved into Richmond Park in 1939. 9 years after it. So, it's important to have a properly researched and, fairly factual history. I'm not saying every single thing I've looked up is 100% correct because I've mainly used newspaper archives for research, and newspapers get things wrong. People's names can sometimes be wrong. But in a broad sense, this is an accurate academic, in a sense, history, but a social history of the football club. And, I do think it's really important for Pats to have that. Pats are a very significant club in Irish football. No matter if you hate Pats or have no massive interest in them, you still have to recognise that Pats are, one of the big clubs in Irish football. For them not to have had a written history is quite remarkable. When you think of the other clubs who've had that for many years. I've discovered why. So it's taken me 4 years to do this, and it's a lot of long nights and a huge amount of quite in-depth research and different skill sets to try and get it. So people who did try and record a history of the club before, I'm by no means the first, but they weren't able to get a book out because that's a big project in itself. But there are lots of people, and I kind of, I'll be talking about it at our launch on Friday night, and I've kind of talked about it on social media and even in the book itself. This is just a continuation of work of people like Pat O'Callaghan, who's a great Pats fan who was involved with the program, but also involved in keeping an archive. John Owens, who many people will know online, or Dodge, who's kept statistics on the club, all programs. Also people like Tom Hanley, who did brilliant interviews with older players back in the 90s and 2000s, players who played in the 40s and 50s and 60s. But I've continued on their work. That's the kind of, and someone's going to continue on the work after me. So you talk, Nathan, about, there should be a Pats history for more modern times, and absolutely there should. And I might do it, or someone else might do it. But what's really important now is we have the basis of the Saints' history going back to 1929, which is when the club was founded, but actually even further back again, because Pats, like many clubs, had different predecessor clubs, also called St. Patrick's or railway clubs in Inchicore that they kind of sprang out of. So that history is in this book, right from before the beginning of St. Patrick's Athletic, and then their competitive seasons starting from 1930 on.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned a legend there in Pat O'Callaghan. The great saying he always says to anybody that'll listen is that any volunteer supporter, we're minding the club for future generations, and we have to leave it in a better state than we found it. So it's great to see. So another Pats legend, Dermot, is Brian Kerr, and I know he's been a bit involved in this process, hasn't he, of the book? I think he's the forwarder for the book. So how did you get Brian involved, and what can we expect from Brian in his couple of words?
Yeah, look, I mean, how did I get Brian involved? I just literally asked him once, and he jumped at the chance. Brian loves Pats. That's just the truth. And he used to commentate in League of Ireland games, and he'd never hide it. He'd never hide his love for St. Pats. What's really interesting is Brian's story of how he came to follow Pats, because this book goes up to 1961. As I said, it's the end of a decade of League of Ireland success for Pats. They joined in 1951. They won 3 leagues in that time. They won 2 FAI Cups. They won a League of Ireland Shield. Irish internationals, hugely successful. And then from 1961 on, up until Kerr takes over as manager and is successful again in the late 80s, Pats are really, there's a massive barren spell. They don't really win anything of significance. His first game, though, as a fan is in 1962. It's right after the time of this book. And he goes down aged, I think, 8 to Richmond Park for a game against Cork Celtic, the great Cork club. And Cork Celtic won the match 8-2. I think it's the highest or the biggest defeat Pats have ever faced in Richmond Park. That's Brian Kerr's first game as a Pats fan. But he loved, and he remembered, Brian is a brilliant memory and he's a great storyteller. We'll all know that from him on the telly and so on. So he remembers a lot of the players from the later era of the book that I've covered here. And of course, he would be aware of so many other people around the club. So he had me get in contact with some people. But look, I asked him would he write the forward. He signed. He was here today signing books with me. We've signed, many books because this book, the way the book came about was we did a crowdfunder, and people who funded the book online are getting signed books signed by Brian, and he's just been remarkable. He's coming to our launch tomorrow night. He's going to say a few words, but he's a Pats person, and he's really proud that we now have a history book. So I think he's got a lot out of it too. But we're really thankful to him. And look, I stand not too far from him on the Canuck side. Like, he's as much a fan of the club as anyone else, except his fandom happens to also being successful manager for 10 years and club legend,
Yeah. Is there, Dermot, is there anything that you found out that you didn't know about the club that fascinated you?
Yeah, nearly all of it. So I knew pretty much nothing. So one of the things, Roy, is I didn't really know, and I've put it out there a lot on social media, and I think it's kind of known now by Pats fans in our program and stuff. Maybe not by the club, by League of Ireland fans in general. Is that Pats are a railway club, as are Dundalk, right? So Dundalk are the other railway club in Ireland. Man United are a railway club, starting as Newton Heath. And there's plenty of them around the world. Peñarol over in Uruguay. And there's lots of railway clubs in football. Pats are as well. And no one ever told me, and I never read it anywhere until now. So they founded a group of 16, 17, 18-year-old lads, got together in the Great Southern Railway Works in Inchicore, and asked the GSR to put on like a second team or a youth team, because they had quite a good football team. And they said no. So they decided to go off and form their own club, and they formed St. Patrick's Athletic. So right from that starting point, I've been learning things. There were clubs before called St. Patrick's, and some of those people came on board in the same way you would have with a lot of junior clubs now. They would kind of maybe disappear for 10 years and come again, with a similar or the same name. So that's kind of the way Pat started off. And then something else, Roy, I learned was, how successful they were in those junior football days and intermediate football days, that they really climbed the ranks. So they had to win the Intermediate League, which is the first league they played in the Phoenix Park. They had to win the AUL Divisions 3, 2 and 1, and they had to win the Leinster Senior Leagues Division 2 and 1 to get anywhere near the League of Ireland. And they were still refused entry when they won all of that 4 times, or 3 times they were refused, and they got admitted at the 4th time of asking. So yeah, I did know about Pat's winning 3 leagues, Shay Gibbons and Ronnie Whelan and Denny Lowry and all these great players. And I've gone into a lot more detail about it, but I wasn't aware of the story before they joined the league. How great they were! They were knocking out Shamrock Rovers FAI Cups. They were winning junior cups and intermediate cups, and they were really, really successful junior football club, and really brought the people of Inchicore and that wider kind of Drimna and Dublin Southwest community together.
Do we know what colours were the original colours? Was it always red and white?
Really interesting question, and kind of is the answer, although of course the photos we have are all black and white, so we only know when it's written down. But I do have stuff going back to the very early 30s, so maybe their second or third season in competitive football, which specifically says red and white. But in the early 40s, when Pats were playing in Leinster Senior League Division 2, they for a time wore white shorts with I think green shamrock on the white shorts, so that's interesting.
It's getting good now.
And blue shorts, and I think blue socks as well. And they went back to red and white then in the late 40s, and you can see the style with the Arsenal style with the red shorts and the white sleeves, definitely by that kind of late 40s period. But even still, and even in the late 50s, early 60s, they wore just red with a white V-neck on the jersey, so it wasn't white sleeves. So they've changed over the years, but red and white is certainly there since the very early days. But it's a great question, and again, because pictures are in black and white, we can't really prove a lot of these things. But having found a few archives and stuff, they wore red and white as their main colours for most of it, and white and red as their away colours for most of those early days.
And with all this new knowledge that you have to get in Dermot, say it's just building up, and you can drop that amateur historian stuff. I'm sure I'm sure you're walking St. Pat's Wikipedia now at this stage. What if you were to give one person just one, probably the most mental, random, bizarre, whatever word you want to put on a fact that you found out about St. Pat's history, what would that be?
Yeah, well, there's loads of bizarre, random things. One of the random things that happened in their junior football days as well was they were playing a match. So Pats, again, something I learned was about the grounds they played in. I didn't really notice. Pats played for a few years in the 40s in a place called Bluebell Lane. For people who know the area, it's kind of where Mr. Price is and the Colmar Road now. And they played there for a few seasons, and they played UCD B, the B team of UCD, in the AUL league around 1936 or so. And the match, and very often the referees didn't turn up. So this is still a big problem, of course, in football nowadays. And that often happened. So eventually they found someone, a support or whatever, who would deputise, who would stand in as a referee. The problem was this fella didn't have a whistle. There was no one could get a whistle. So the game wasn't going to go ahead. For whatever reason, he needed some whistle or something like it for the game to be allowed to go ahead. And there was a fella going by in a little ice cream cart, and he had one of these kind of hand horns. Those kind of things. And so they grabbed the ice cream van horn, and the ref ran around the pitch with this in his hand, little kind of mini trumpet thing, and parked on the horn whenever a free kick was available. The game went ahead. But every season there is a really interesting kind of little tidbit of a story like that. That was one from the junior years, but kept going. And the fascinating thing, of course, the League of Ireland era, when these players became really good and were called up to Ireland squads. And Shay Gibbons, who people will know, was probably the best Pats player of this era. He's still our record goal scorer, centre forward. Played 4 times for Ireland while playing for Pats. He was very nearly one of the Busby babes. In fact, Matt Busby came over, watched him play, wanted to sign him, and Pats wouldn't let him sign by the sound of things, which is remarkable. And there's lots of these kind of examples of either potential kind of crossroads in people's careers and people's lives. And Shay Gibbons is one of them. He did go on to great fame in Ireland, but he could have yet been over there in the 50s as part of the Busby Babes.
Well, the way it went with the Busby Babes, the sliding doors scenario, it could have been a fortunate thing for him. Why do you love St. Pat's?
Well, like, why do any of us love our football club? So you go down. Now, I went down as a teenager. My dad actually played for Pats for a season, so it's in the family. And I discovered in writing the book that my grandfather had actually been on the committee of the club, something I didn't know at all. So there is a family connection for me, and there's a local connection as well. But look, I went down in the mid to late 90s when Pats were actually very successful. They were winning leagues. So I was down the shed end with my mates, and we were lighting up flares and all that kind of stuff that lads love to do. So I got a very straightforward kind of attraction to going to games. A successful team, great atmospheres under the floodlights. Starting to go traveling and stuff. That was brilliant for me. So that's when I fell in love. Well, I think like if you ask anyone in the league of in Irish football, yes, they might have those family connections or those local connections, but they have to enjoy it. Now, enjoying it mightn't mean winning leagues, and we can't all win the league every year. So you have to find some kind of enjoyment out of it, love out of it. And for me, still, it's going to games, and I'll go to games with my friends, but I also go to games of my own if I need to. And be plenty of people around, so it's a great social experience. And what I've found out about Pats is look, everyone thinks they follow the best club in the world, because if you don't, you have to be a bit deluded about this. If you don't think you're following the best club in the world, go follow someone else. So you have to have a complete irrational love for it and a tribal kind of instinct to support a football club, I think, if you're going to really, really support it. So I got that for Pats very early on, and after, it's not going to leave me. And you don't go change your League of Ireland club anyway. So I think that's part of an answer for you, Roy. No?
Yeah, no, I do. I've asked Nathan on many occasions. He stumbles a little bit on it. He's not sure now at the moment. I think he's having doubts.
You got to go through thick and thin as well. That's the truth. You can't be abandoning ship when you're not doing well,
No, that's why I'm from Ballyfermot, and my first game was the 2003 Cup final, beating against Longford. So set me up in the path to go on, fucking losing Cup finals.
That was the only game I ever cried at, Nathan.
Yeah, no, I would have been quite young. So didn't really cry. The only time I ever cried was when we won the cup. Funny enough, after that was my fourth final at this stage. But there was all the fans that have been through much worse than I've been. But don't be minding, Roy. Don't be minding at all. Since I moved to Sligo, me love of Pats have probably even grown more every Friday, like a lunatic up that N4 motorway trying to go up to Richmond Park.
Don't mind him,
Sligo, I was nearly in tears on Friday night up there giving Pat's performance. But anyway, that's another. On the referee,
we'll say less about that. Yeah,
Dermot, he has a half and half scarf there with Sligo and Pat's on it. Don't mind him.
Season ticket just right at the halfway line.
Just before we finish off about the book, what have you made of Pat's season this year?
Yeah, look, it was very tumultuous at the end of last season with what happened with Stevie O'Donnell. And clearly Tim Clancy didn't have the kind of team that he really wanted. It was he did make some signings and so on. I think it was a bit of a rush job. So we were all fairly ambitious at the start of the season, seeing big names like Colin Doyle coming in and so on. But if you look back on it, in fairness, probably didn't have the team there that he wanted. He's made some good signings, and we've been excellent since we got knocked out of Europe. Went on a great run. It's obviously fourth place. I think they were able for third. I think we really fell apart in some important games, particularly up in Sligo the other night. Should have put in a better performance. But I think fourth is a reasonable outcome, and obviously just hoping Derry will do the job in the cup, which I think they should. And if you do get fourth in Europe, there's certainly no complaints from me anyway as regards to that. I think we'd be hopeful of Pat's improving next season. I don't think they're going to be challenging Derry and Shamrock Rovers, but hopefully more consistent and maybe playing I'd be interested to see what kind of football they play next year, because they've gone back to really being a counter-attacking team in the second half of this season. That's been a really interesting change in terms of the way they're doing it. So I will be interested to see that next year. But it's been an okay season. Look, I talk in this book about plateaus and, times when you go 5 or 6 years without winning anything or having a chance of winning anything. We had a great couple of results in Europe, really. So it's been an okay season, decent enough.
Yeah. If there's one thing that you could change instantly at St. Pat's, what would it be?
The ground needs, not that I would want to move, but the ground needs major improvements. And I think there's a lot of talk about that, and there's a lot of talk quite recently about it, and so I'd be hoping to hear something soon enough. I was involved in campaign group to keep Pats at Richmond in the mid 2000s. It was looking like we were getting pushed very strongly to move to Tala, and it was something we objected to very strongly. We want Pats to stay in Inchy Court. It doesn't have to be Richmond for me, but ideally it would be. And then the proposed move across the road really didn't go very well. So I would be very hopeful that there will be some good news on the ground front soon, because it's great. I love Richmond Park. I absolutely adore going down to it. It's, like Nathan there nodding, it's our kind of home. But it's not good enough for bringing families down and the demands of modern football. So I'd be very hopeful that they would be able to do that. That's the one thing. I wouldn't be changing a huge amount, but a new kind of modernised ground would be great.
Do you think it's a bit airy-fairy at the moment? Or do you think there's any momentum? It's very hard to get these things built. It's very hard to get momentum with these, and it does take a long time.
I honestly don't know, Roy. You hear whispers as a fan. They'll be announcing something and they're doing this and that, and I don't know. I'm not close enough to the scene. But what I do think, this is a real discussion we need to have across the league. So I think that was good news from Bowes today, but they have a long way to go before they do it as well. And I was up in Sligo on Friday, been nearly all the away grounds this year. They're talking to Finn Harp's guys, so there's so much of a demand and a requirement, I suppose, to do up these grounds. They're just not up to stack at all. And I was involved. I was on South Dublin County Council for 10 years, so I was involved in Tala Stadium quite heavily for those 10 years, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's the model, I think, for so many people to follow. But it didn't happen just because of Shamrock Rovers, and they're a massive part of the story. But it happened because a fairly visionary local authority was willing to take on a bit of stick and spend a lot of money in improving its facilities. And that's something we have to win politically and in the media and everything else as Irish football fans. If we're going to be serious about a proper professional league, because it's just not good enough for fans to be getting rained on and not have the cover, be it at Richmond Park or in nearly any other ground in the league.
No, and as we've talked about this many times before, Nathan, it's a family experience. You need to make that family experience an enjoyable one, not getting drowned with your soggy chips. There means to be a lot more in the grounds that can keep people entertained, even your half-time performances and stuff like that. You see it all over the world. It's an entertainment, so it's not just good enough to have the game there, although be it that's the most important part for us all. Okay, we're going to leave it at that. Tell us where people can get the book once it's launched.
Yeah, so we're speaking here on Thursday night, right? So Friday, November 4th, we're doing the launch down in McDowell's in Inchy Court, and I'll be selling books there. We're also going to sell them at the Pat Shells game on Sunday, November 6th. And from then on, I suppose Monday is the 7th of November. We'll be online on the club shop at stpatsfc.com, and also on the club shop in Richmond Park. It's normal opening hours. So the club are brilliant. The club are selling the book for us. It would be too hard for me to do it on my own, I think. So you'll get it online on the Pat's website and also in person at the Pat's shop. We're not going to go through booksellers and stuff like that. They take a huge cut. We think, it's better to go give people a chance to get down to the club shop and maybe buy a bit of gear, although there's probably not a lot of merchandise going around with Umbro and everything else that's been going on at the moment. But you can get a season ticket maybe if they buy the book as well. And that's where it will be in person and online.
That's excellent. And I don't think it's going to be just for the Pats fan. I think for the League of Ireland fanatic out there that this could be a good read. And Christmas is coming up as well, so why not? Why not go and get that and have a good read?